Mum, just come. No, you just gotta wave. Just come.
I just want to know why you're eating my cereal.
It's not. It's my weetbix for the morning.
It's not. They're my weetbix.
They're not your weetbix. I thought it was a shared communal holiday food. Normally have Fruit Loops on the holiday. This time around having weetbix.
They're not their special weetbix.
Yeah, they just have a lot of fibre in them.
No, they've got coconut and berries. Can you not handle my food?
I just need them for the...
Are you gonna eat them?
Yeah, we're doing... This is... Well, big g'day and welcome to Beyond. We are so excited and so glad that you are here, whether you're clicking in on Facebook or YouTube, whether it's your 100th time, 3rd, 2nd or 1st. We're so excited to be hosting you this morning for today's episode of Beyond at Home. And hey, we want to let you know that today we're jumping into a conversation that's probably pretty topical. This year has had a lot of quick changes to it. Maybe there's times where you had a full week, 2 weeks, month. Maybe you're like 3 months ahead, 6-month planner. You had things in place that you knew were coming up next, and then everything kind of got chucked out the window. It's been a year of having to adapt, to pivot, to change. And in that, we wanted to start a conversation over the next couple of weeks around how we can actually go about dealing with change. When things get dropped, when we have difficult moments in our life, when life all of a sudden has a curveball kind of thrown at it, and we have to try and figure out what to do next. There's something that we can learn more about and something that we can grow in. And that's why over the next couple of weeks, we are talking about resilience and how we actually need to fight for it. Today, we're jumping into a conversation with Chris, but we want to let you know if you've never had an experience with church before, maybe you have some pushback to the whole Christianity thing, maybe at the same time, you just have some questions about meaning or purpose or even about faith, we want to let you know that we are catering today's episode with you in mind, because here at Beyond, we want to create a church, we want to create a community that unchurched people love to attend. So we're so excited today to host you for today's episode of Beyond at Home. Here's Chris for that conversation for part 1 of Fight For It.
To say that this year, 2020, has been a year of disruptions is probably the understatement of the year. In fact, for a lot of us, right now, if we were to kind of characterize this year would probably be known as the year of disruptions. Well, in this episode of Beyond at Home, we're going to talk about how you can bounce back from the disruptions that life throws your way. We're here at a local footy ground, and you might be wondering to yourself, Chris, why are we at a local footy ground? You know, you're not a footy player. Like, why would you take us to a footy ground? You've got no life experience around footy to share. Well, for as long as I can remember growing up, my family and I, our weekends used to revolve around rugby league. Ever since I was little, we had season tickets to the Brisbane Broncos right back when they were playing at ANZ Stadium before their move to now Lang Park or Suncorp Stadium. And one of the things I remember, I think probably like a lot of young boys and young girls, when they're looking up to their sporting stars, I remember thinking to myself, I want to be like them when I grow up. Now, here's the thing, when you're young, you're kind of naive, right? And when I was young, I was not a lot bigger than what I am now. And if I was to play rugby league right now, I would get broken in half. And so right back when I was younger, I would have definitely got broken in half if I played rugby league. But there's something about us when we're young, isn't there, that kind of just doesn't take into account reality. You know, there's this naivety, there's this just inbuilt resilience. And so I remember leaving home one day and I said to my mum, as I walked out the door, I was in grade 8 at the time, I said, Mum, I'm going to sign up for the rugby league team today. And Mum was like, honey, do you think that's the wise thing to do? Like, you know, in her mind, she's kind of like, look at you, like you will get broken in half. And I was like, no, Mum, I'm going to sign up for the rugby league team today. And so lunchtime came, and after lunch we had our trials, and I remember the teachers all had us sitting down, and they told us which classrooms to go to sign up for the sports that we were going to play. And they told us what room rugby league was. And I remember as I was walking towards that classroom, everything kind of got real for me. All of a sudden, I began to realize things that I hadn't realized before. I began to realize, hey, these guys are kind of twice my size. Like, they're taller than me, they're stronger than me, they're bigger than me. They have muscles that I don't have. Like, they look mean. And I remember walking into that room, and the first thing I looked around and I played as if I was confused. And I remember tapping one of the biggest guys in the room on the shoulder, and I was like, hey, is this the room for soccer sign-ups? He's like, no, man, that's down the hall. And I was like, oh, awesome. And I left to go and sign up for soccer. And you might be thinking to yourself, Chris, what does your failed attempt to play rugby league have to do with disruptions? Well, let me explain. You see, in life, it's one thing to observe life from the grandstands and think to ourselves, hey, if I was in that situation, I'd be able to bounce back. I'd be able to handle things differently. It's another thing entirely to actually be on the field, to be taking the hits within life and trying to bounce back. And that's kind of what we're talking about throughout this series. We're talking about this word resilience. Resilience is the ability to bounce back from the disruptions that life throws at us. Just like in a game of rugby league, there are two teams and they're both trying to score a try, but the entire objective of the other team is to disrupt them as much as possible so that they can't score a try. And the reality for all of us, whether we're Jesus followers or not, is that we all experience disruptions in life. And some of those disruptions are mildly inconvenient, and some of those disruptions are heartbreaking. In fact, why don't you let me know right now in the comments, what are some of the most annoying disruptions that you're experiencing in life at the moment? Now, for some of us, it could be getting stuck behind someone in traffic on the way to work. For another of us, it could be just someone forgetting your takeaway coffee order and you've got to be somewhere on time. You know, maybe for you, you want to be married. Maybe you want to have kids. Maybe you want to get that promotion at work. Maybe there are some just small, insignificant disruptions that are bugging you right now. Like you've got a friend that you're waiting for them to text back or call back because you're trying to organize a time to catch up and they just haven't been able to do it. Maybe you're waiting for an email from that client or from that lecturer or from that teacher about a particular subject and you can't seem to get a response back from them. Well, resilience is the ability to bounce back from the disruptions that we all face in life. Really, resilience is the emotional fitness test that we all put ourselves through that helps us bounce back from the everyday disruptions that life throws at us. Now, at the outset of a series like this, I've already kind of hinted at it, but I think it's really, really important to state it clearly that life is full of disruptions. From the small, inconvenient disruptions all the way through to the big, life-altering disruptions. That diagnosis that you weren't expecting, that death in the family that you never saw coming, that marriage breakdown or that relationship breakdown that you thought was going to be forever. And I'll be honest, to think that I can sit on this video or stand on this video and speak to you about the really, really challenging circumstances of life is kind of almost laughable. But what I want to do within this series is talk about some of the smaller disruptions that we experience in life. Because I think how we engage and how we tackle the smaller disruptions can help us when it comes to some of the biggest disruptions that life will throw at us. It's also important at the outset to note that everyone has a different starting point when it comes to resilience. Okay, just like for me, no matter how much I train, no matter how much I try, I think that there's a certain limit that I would get to in my ability to play rugby league. All of us come from different starting points when it comes to resilience, because all of us have different genetics and epigenetics. All of us have different family circumstances. All of us grew up in different regions. So all of us come from different starting points, which means that there are different ways and different areas in which we can grow resilience into our lives. So this series is primarily targeted at helping us deal with the small disruptions in life. Because like I said earlier, our ability to deal with the smaller disruptions in life and to bounce back in the small disruptions can help us when it comes to the bigger disruptions that life has to throw at us. The good news is that whether you consider yourself a resilient person or not, all of us have the ability to grow in our resilience, because resilience is like a muscle. And so all of us can grow in it in some way, shape, or form. I want to introduce you to someone who taught resilience because they had to live resilience out. And this person's name is James, and James is actually the brother of Jesus. And James actually had to be a really resilient kid growing up. I mean, after all, his brother thought he was God. Like, could you imagine being on the school bus on the way to school and you kind of lean over to Jesus and you'd be like, hey, look, I know you think you're God, but could you just maybe not say anything today? Because if you say something, then everyone at school is going to think I'm brothers with the crazy guy. And James actually, for his entire life, didn't believe that Jesus was who he claimed to be. Because who would if your brother claimed to be God? James wouldn't believe that his brother was his savior. until after his death and resurrection. And then his life dramatically changed. And it got to a moment where people had stones and spears and they asked James to deny the fact that his brother was his savior. And James said, I can't do that. And James was murdered for his belief. But before he was martyred for his faith, James wrote a letter to a group of Jesus followers. And it's that letter in which he began to teach us about resilience. Now here's what he writes. He says, "Dear brothers and sisters, when troubles of any kind come your way." Now notice that James doesn't write if troubles of any kind come your way, because James lives in the real world. James knows that if you're living, you will experience trouble. So when they come your way, he says, here's what you're to do. Consider it an opportunity for great joy. Now this word consider, it's a big verb that James is referring to. It doesn't simply mean to think about how your disruption could be an opportunity for great joy, but it means to lead yourself and lead your thinking in such a way that you see the opportunity or the disruption as an opportunity for great joy. Now, this doesn't mean that you see the disruption as joyful, but it means that in spite of the disruption, in the midst of the trouble, that you find opportunities to be joyful. In 1989, a developmental psychologist by the name of Emmy Warner published her results of a longitudinal study of just under 700 children in Hawaii. Now, a longitudinal study is a study that happens over a long time, and Emmy tracked these students over 3 decades of life. And what she discovered is that those children that had the ability to bounce back had what she called an internal locus of control. And really what this means, this internal locus of control, means that the children saw not their situations as controlling them, but they recognized that in the midst of things they couldn't control, there were a number of things that they could control, which actually helped them bounce back. And that's really what James is saying here. Hey, in the midst of everything that's going on in your life, there will be some things you cannot control, but focus on the things that you can control and consider it a great joy and focus on those things. And then he goes on and he says, "For you know that when your faith is tested, your endurance has a chance to grow." And we kind of mentioned this earlier, that resilience is not a static trait, but it's a muscle that you can begin to build. And James writes, "So let it grow. For when your endurance is fully developed, you will be perfect and complete, needing nothing." See, the purpose of troubles, the purpose of disruptions is so that you can become a more complete version of you. And if you're a Jesus follower, the purpose of your disruptions helps you to become a little more like Jesus. So my challenge for you, but my challenge also for myself is, would you stop trying to avoid the pain? Would you stop trying to fight to avoid disruptions? But would you instead fight for resilience? Because there's something that we can learn in every disruption. The pain in your life can have a purpose. We think that oftentimes in life, in order to be complete, we need to avoid pain. But James would say we actually become more complete when we walk through our pain, when we walk through the disruptions of life. And Jesus would say that's so true as well, because it wasn't until he walked through death that he won us freedom from our sins. In fact, I would say that we endure better in the big disruptions in life when we fight for it in the small disruptions. And here's one way that you can begin to fight for it. I can't get up. When James says, consider it pure joy, like I said, that's a verb, that's an action word. And a word that we might use a little bit more in our culture is the word grateful. So here's, I think, the easiest way that you can begin to engage with everything we've been talking about. We kind of call that our Form Monday. Here's what I want you to do. I want you to look for 3 things that you're grateful for every single day this week. You know, whether you look for them in the morning, whether you look for them at lunch, whether you look for them right before you go to bed, I want you to look for and write down 3 things that you're grateful for. Now, I know that sometimes that can be challenging to do. And if you're just looking for things to be grateful for every day, there are some days you're going to write down the same 3 things. So if you're kind of like, I'm not really sure if I'm feeling that, Chris, here's another option. I want you to write down 3 things that went well today. Now, this question might change depending on whether you journal in the morning or at lunchtime or in the evening. If you journal in the morning, you might write down 3 things that went well yesterday. Or if you journal at night, you might look back on the day that's been and you say, hey, what were 3 things that went really, really well today? And even if you're someone who's not in the middle of a disruption or experiencing a disruption in life right now, beginning to develop this practice of being grateful or looking for things that went well and considering it joyful will help you when you begin to experience the disruptions that life will inevitably throw your way. And I understand that you might look at that and be like, 3 things, Chris, I'm still kind of not really convinced. And if that's you, I'd invite you to think back to your childhood. There's this really famous childhood song. It's actually a book as well called Bear Hunt. And there's these really famous lines in the book that get repeated over and over again. And they say, we can't go over it. We can't go under it. We've got to go through it. And in the same way, James would say that you can't go over and you can't go under the disruptions that life throws at you. The best way to grow, the best way to begin to build resilience is to go through the disruptions that life has to throw at you. And as you're going through them, look for things that you can celebrate. Look for ways that you can be grateful or that you can celebrate the things that went well. And in that way, you will truly be fighting for resilience. So this week, begin to fight for resilience by looking at 3 things you're grateful for or 3 things that went well every single day, and tune back in for our next episode of Beyond at Home. We're going to look at one thing that we all dislike, but it can be a massive resilience builder.
Thanks so much for jumping in for today's episode of Beyond at Home. Hey, if you really liked what Chris was sharing today, or maybe you want to continue the conversation, we'd love to point you towards our Beyond the Message podcast. You can find it on any platform. All you need to do is just chuck in the search bar Beyond the Message, and you'll actually see a podcast interview with Chris and one of our other fellas from Beyond, Lockie McLean, and they are going to be hosting a chat as to what part 1 of Fight For It was kind of really about, and a couple more kind of ideas around it too. If that's something you're interested in, we'd love to point you towards our Beyond the Message. At the same time, you can always connect on our social platforms as well. In fact, you can just type connect into the comment bar and one of our Beyond team will be able to get in touch with you. Thanks so much again for jumping in and joining us for today's episode of Beyond at Home. We'll be so excited to see you click in for next week and maybe even tag someone else along that you think would be interested and would engage with this series of Fight For It. We hope you have a great rest of your week. Enjoy. Have a great week.